1, 2, 3, 4.
He's no one, she's no one, we're no one anymore.
Welcome to the second edition of the Co-Pro Podcast. We're here live in Nemo World headquarters. Today's date is July 26, 2024. And with us today, we have our special guest, Tom Monterosso.
How's it going?
Pretty good.
Yeah.
So what does that last name mean?
In Italian, it oddly enough means the Red Mountain.
And you got some red features?
Yep, I love mountains. So it kind of adds up. I actually didn't know that until maybe like 4 years ago.
Isn't that weird?
Yeah, someone told me that, and I was like, oh, yeah, I guess Monte is mountain and Rosso is red, so it adds up.
It was meant to be.
There's actually a town in northern Italy, not where my great-great-grandparents were from, who did come from Italy, called Monterosso, and it's in the Cinque Terre. And a bunch of people, like Sage Kotzenberg went there one year and sent me a bunch of photos of him with the big sign that said, "Welcome to Monterosso." So people think that my family's from there, but they're technically not. They're from Sicily.
Well, just own it anyway.
Yeah, I should just say that they're from there. Yeah.
I own this shit. And again, it's like you're such a talented guy. We're super stoked to have you in. Again, what's really super interesting about your career and where you've been is just the starting as a writer, getting into photography, taking the big travels, event promotion, entrepreneurship. There's so many hats that you've worn. And we'll get into your Blazers hat here eventually. But there's, and that's what's so interesting in having you here with us today. So, and I shouldn't sidebar this either. The other big job, husband and a dad.
Yes, husband and dad.
Those
the
are big
biggest
jobs.
Yeah,
and
for
so
sure.
It's very important, and I know you take that stuff real seriously, and I appreciate that you do. So again, there's a DNA between the two of us that I when I start thinking about it, was East Coast related. And again, Snowboarder magazine kind of really connects us in our careers. So again, what's super interesting is, again, you started your career in New England, and you grew up in New Hampshire.
I grew up in Bedford, New Hampshire, a small little town just outside of Manchester.
All right.
Yep.
So Plymouth State.
Yep. So I went to Manchester West High School, and it was funny because I had no college ambitions for a long time, nor did I really have the grades to get into college for a long time. And then as a kid, I battled ADHD, which is pretty normalized now. It's not as stigmatized as it once was.
Did they give you pills?
I was on a ton of Ritalin.
No way.
Time release Ritalin every day. I think like 280 milligrams. It was a ton. And I was actually in a like special ed classroom, right? But back then they didn't compartmentalize special ed.
Right.
It was just if you had any sort of learning disability whatsoever, you kind of had to go to this one room for one period every day, and you would take your tests, and you would get a little extra help studying and stuff like that. And my teacher in this...
Hold on a sec.
Oh, yeah.
Is this her?
Yes. My teacher in this department was Tina Benhart. I'm almost like getting emotional, like looking at Tina, because she was the sweetest lady I've ever met. And I remember talking to her, and she's like, "Oh, you're super into snowboarding, right?" And I was like, "Yeah, I love snowboarding." And she's like, "Have you ever heard of Plymouth State University?" And I had, but I didn't know much about it. And she says to me, "My son Andy goes there, and he lives with a bunch of snowboarders." And now, mind you, at the time, I was kind of friends with Luke Matheson and Maddie Ryan, who are from Manchester, and they were kind of semi-pro snowboarders. So she tells me about Plymouth State, and she brings in all these photos, and it turns out the photos were from this thing called the Blue Lodge, which is where, Mike Parziel, Paul Miller, Shane Flood, Kevin Nimick, Andy Benhart, Ben Fee, Wayne, just all, the people I would come to meet, they lived there. And she showed me all these photos of them snowboarding on rails in their front yard and saying they go to Waterville and Loon all the time. So Tina Benhart, without a doubt, like looking back on it, that was like portal one that opened, where I became hyper focused on being like, okay, all I got to do is get my grades up to go to Plymouth, which was not that hard, quite frankly. And so I got my grades up. I applied to Plymouth State University, and I got in, and that was like step one in my journey to snowboarding. You know, I didn't know who I would meet from there on out, but that was the first step for sure.
So now, speaking of phase, step one for you, and again, back to the way it worked on the East Coast is we kind of had these iterations of crews that had come through, and I'd say I was part of the first crew that came through.
Yep.
And then there's the second wave, and then you were probably part of the third wave that
Yep.
came out of
2.5 or 3. It's funny.
Sullivan and Bridges were kind of before you.
Yes.
And Kavala maybe right in that group, and
Yep.
then I was before that.
And Joel Muzzy.
Muzz, that's
Yeah,
right.
I remember seeing Muzzy around, and I remember like idolizing those guys, Bridges and Muzzy,
Right.
and it's funny because it's an interesting thing when you idolize someone until you meet them, like because then they become a friend. I'm not saying you don't still idolize them. They go from an idol to a homie. Like John Cavan is a great example. He was making all the Eastern Edge movies, Iron Curtain 1, 2, and 3. Back in the day, if I had told 18-year-old T-Bird that you'd be working on multiple projects with John Cavan, I wouldn't have believed myself. But you get to know these people, and you're like, oh, they're just human beings who are stoked on snowboarding just like me. And then you find you have those common passions, and you just kind of get along with them forever. So, but yeah, I remember, I kind of got embedded with the Blue Lodge crew, and Andy and Brian Barb and Preston Strout was a huge one for me. He was a really big one for me. But I think the most important person in my life, in my time at Plymouth, was Ben Fee. I don't know if you remember Ben.
Hold on, maybe I do.
Oh, no.
This guy.
Yes.
Yes,
Ben
Ben
Fee. Just
probably the most creative individual.
the only person I know that's never had a sip of alcohol in their lives and
Yep.
can out-party any individual on Earth. And Ben and I kind of really hit it off. We became really good buddies. And we'll get into it later, but once I graduated college, Ben had gotten a job at Snowboarder magazine.
Yep.
And he had called me and just kind of without telling Bridges, just told me to fly out there and start working at Snowboarder. But what that's taught me is, getting a degree in English with a minor in writing was probably the second most important thing I did in my career. The first was making the gut decision to go to Plymouth State and surround myself with people that are like-minded and that are as stoked on snowboarding as I was, because I saw their drive to stay in the industry, and I kind of figured, like, if they can do it, I think I can do it too. Maybe not to the same degree, because some of them were pro snowboarders. Paul Miller started Air Blaster, Kevin Nimick moved out here and started working in the industry, but I was like, I think I can find my lane in snowboarding and figure it out from there.
Absolutely. So again, we connect at Plymouth State, and that's where I met with Eric Webster, and that's where I would drive from Syracuse to stay at his place to do the New England Cup Series. And again, as you mentioned, crews, which is a really big part of collective progression for us, is like surrounding yourself with like-minded people. I really resonate with what you said there, because for us it was the crew with Brushy and Andy Coughlin, Jason Ford, Todd Richards, and then we came up the ranks, and then blaze a trail for the rest of you guys. But we also had a house too. It was a Habit Trail house. So you guys had the Blue Lodge. We had the Team Habit Trail.
Where was that one?
It was up in right off of Sugarbush.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
So those guys would. Rob Levine was part of that. Noah Brandon, Jason Ford. So those guys all lived there. So again, I think the crew was smaller. I don't think they partied as hard as you guys did at Blue, but at the same time, again, it kind of forged the way and the path forward for everybody else on the East Coast to make it out.
Yeah.
And then the interesting one is, again, you're traveling and heading out to do Snowboarder magazine. So I'll get into it a bit later, but again, I was one of the founders as senior photographer for the East Coast at Snowboarder magazine.
Yep.
So early print, first issue, I'm there. And then you got there at Snowboarder magazine.
Yeah. It was an interesting move to go to Southern California. It breaks my mom's heart to hear this, but I'll say it because I've said it a million times. Like, I knew I was gonna leave New Hampshire when I was like 16. I just didn't know how. It was just a little too small for me. And, going back to Plymouth and falling in with the Blue Lodge crew, I feel like the next big step was working at High Cascade Snowboard Camp, because that was like the bottleneck to the industry. It's where you went from being kind of a bigger fish in a small pond to a really small fish in a really big pond. And so, Ben and Paul Miller and Andy Benhart and all those guys kind of lobbied for me and got me a job at High Cascade. My first year, I was an ambulance driver. So I drove a minivan with kids with like snapped arms to the Hood River Hospital, basically, was my job. And I remember being bummed on it because I'm like, this is kind of uncomfortable. Like, I'm seeing the worst of camp in a weird way because, you bring the kid to the hospital, maybe they have surgery, but regardless, you're the one that has to tell them that, hey, we called your parents and they're going to fly out and you're done with camp. It was kind of like being a team manager that can only cut riders and you don't get to sign any. But I remember all those guys telling me, they're like, just stick it out because you get through this summer and then you're going to have whatever job you want, So then I became a counselor. So from 2000 to 2005, I would go to Plymouth, snowboard all year at Waterville and Loon, which were kind of the hot spots of the East Coast snowboard scene at the time. And then all of my friends from Plymouth that I lived with would go to Nantucket and kind of surf and work, and I would boogie out to Mount Hood, and I would work there. And once that happened, going back to me saying I kind of always knew I was going to leave, I was like, Portland's the spot. I'm moving to Portland. I'm going to graduate and just move to Portland and figure it out. What ended up happening was I graduated. Ben Fee called me and said, I got a job at Snowboarder magazine. Why don't you come out and just start working for us? So instead of going to Portland, I sold my car and pretty much everything I own, and I bought a one-way ticket to Southern California, and I lived in a tent on Ben's porch in Huntington Beach for like 7 months until Bridges eventually hired me and brought me on.
That's a big commitment.
Yeah, my mom thought I was nuts. It was kind of nuts. It was a very rash and like not very well thought out move, but again, sometimes you just kind of have to just go with your gut. I remember talking to my dad and being like, I don't really know what I'm doing. I don't know if I'm going to get a job. What happens if I have to move back home because of the embarrassment of, kind of walking home with your tail between your legs? And my dad was like, just say you didn't like it. Like, who gives a shit? Just come back if you want to.
Good for him. And
So
I
yeah.
understand too, like your parents split up at one point, and how did that affect you?
It's interesting. My parents got divorced when I was 11, and at that point in time, I want to say that was 94. So I was 12 or 13. And at that point in time, divorce wasn't, again, I don't want to say normalized, but it wasn't as common as it was, as it is today. And quite frankly, it like really fucked me up for a long time. But I also think it kind of fucked me up in a good way, in a weird way, because it forced me to realize that like shitty things are going to happen to you your entire life. So you just have to seek out the positive and just constantly go for that. Even if things are going wrong, there's always a little something you can find, like a light at the end of the tunnel, to be like, you know what? There's other people that have it way worse than I do, and this isn't really the worst thing that could ever happen to me. Now, 30 some odd years later, I have an amazing stepfather. I have an incredible stepmother with 3 great stepbrothers who I'm super close with. So it turned out to be a really good thing. But my brother, Gary, went to live with my dad. I stayed with my mom. And so I kind of went from having my dad and my brother, who were like my 2 best buddies, to basically being like an only child for a long time. It was just my mom and I. And it was really tough because I didn't have anyone to lean on, because divorce just wasn't like a common thing. No one I really knew was going through the same stuff that I was trying to emotionally go through. So yeah, it was shitty at the time, but really good in retrospect. And that's something that I take from it, because if that didn't happen, I wouldn't be sitting where I am today. And I'm grateful to be sitting where I am today.
And also, and congratulations on all that you've been able to accomplish. And a lot of kids do get kind of thrown into the, into the wind when these terrible and traumatic things happen in their lives, and it's tough to get through them. And so, congrats.
Thank you.
Your family will be, stoked for you for everything else. And so again, it also, what I'm hearing is it opened up doors for you. And so you were able to parlay that and have, let's say the comfort that might have kept you in Plymouth now gave you the freedom to head to the West Coast, camp out on Ben Fee's deck in a tent, and take a job that really wasn't there yet.
No, it was not there. I remember, going into Snowboarder my first day, and like I didn't know where to sit. I didn't have a computer because I didn't own a laptop at the time, and so Ben just put me in this like cubicle kind of near like the Surfer magazine guys. And I just did nothing for a full day. I just sat there and like looked through old magazines.
Good.
And then Bridges came over and was kind of like, who are you? What's your deal? And I was, I'm T-Bird. I'm one of Ben's buddies. And he's like, are you in college? And I'm like, no, I'm not. I graduated college. And he's like, well, interns have to be in college. And I'm like, shit. Like I'm literally the house of cards is crumbling around me. And then he's like, well, we'll get you to do something. And then he just started giving me little things to write here and there and throwing more mags at me. He's like, study these, write this for the website. And back then, people weren't writing for websites, So I was doing like snowboard movie reviews online. And I'll never forget, going to snowboardermag.com. And it was like this crazy beta site. Like it was really not user friendly, but seeing, the title of a story and then words, Tom Monterosso. And I was like, holy shit, I did it. I'm here. That's it.
I'm bigger than life.
And then I kind of, got like addicted to that. Like I wanted to see my name in print and I wanted to write a ton of stuff. And then little did I know, I've never talked to Ben about this, but I'm pretty sure when Ben invited me out, he knew he was going to be leaving. And so I feel like that was Ben's way of putting someone in position so he could leave clean and move to LA and make music videos and do all the crazy, awesome stuff that he's doing now. And so once Ben left, there was another guy named Joe Prebich who actually lives in Lake Oswego now. Works for the James brand. Joe also left to go work for Red Bull, I believe. And then it was just me and Bridges for 12 more years or something like that.
Did you start smoking cigarettes too?
Unfortunately, I had already smoked. Plymouth was the harbinger of my smoking. So Pat and I kicked it off quick.
There you go.
Like real quick over multiple cigarettes. But we've both since quit. A long time ago.
Much healthier for it.
Yeah.
And then selfishly, I want to jump into cameras. It's like I know you're right, no disrespect, but I know you as a shooter.
Yeah.
That's my context. And again, when we connected on the Ride project, Rough Around the Edges, I really started to get to know what you are in researching and all your shots and stuff. And so, tell me about your first camera.
My first camera, again, goes back to Ben Fee. When he was moving out of his apartment in Huntington, I tore down my tent and I took over Ben's room, and he was cleaning his room out, and we still don't know whose camera this was. I think it was Espen Listad's, but Espen didn't claim that the camera was his. So it was a Nikon D70, and it was broken. And Ben just was cleaning out his closet, and he just kind of had it, no lens, nothing. It was just a camera body, and he was like, hey, do you want this? And I was just like, sure. So I took it, I brought it into Sammy's camera in Irvine.
Yeah.
They fixed it for $125, and then I bought a little fixed 35 millimeter, 2.8 lens, and I was off to the races. And then I brought it to Super Park, and very much like when I saw my first byline on snowboardermag.com. I'll never forget the first photo I ever shot for print. It would be really hard to dig up actually now, but it was a photo of Mason Aguirre chasing his pit bull, and the pit bull was running right at me down the mountain because we were at a photo shoot at Boreal. And I remember Huggy, our photo editor at the time, was like, "Hey, we should run that in the article." And I was like, "Yeah, that'd be fucking awesome." And so I got my first photo published. And then again, maybe I have an addictive personality. I think I might, because
a theme that I see. There's a fear of being passed by.
For sure. Yeah.
In just the career trajectory that I've noticed for you.
Yep. 100%. There is it's that, I think, mixed with adult ADHD, right? That maybe I've learned how to harness a little bit more and channel towards certain things. Mm-hmm. But once I started on the photo thing, that just kind of took off. But I will say it put me in a weird spot. And I'm not saying I caused this, but when I was just a writer, I would go on stories as a writer. Before I owned a camera, I would just go with a notepad or just bring my laptop. And then they would send a photographer. So it'd be me and Eastone, or me and Espen, or me and Oli Gagnon, or, this fleet of amazing photographers that we had at Snowboarder magazine. At a certain point, I remember Bridges being like, "Can you just write and shoot it?" Which is now like the industry standard, just have the photographer write it. And again, I'm not saying I caused that, but I don't think I helped.
Oh, I was doing that way before that.
Okay, good. That's good.
I had to handle Billy Jarvis. I would write under Billy Jarvis and shoot under Trevor Graves, because I'm not a writer, but we needed to do because budgets were tight.
Right.
As I'm sure they're tight now.
Yeah, exactly. And so, eventually, as the need for writers, I don't want to say declined, but as the need for photography, especially with the advent of social media, kind of started to outweigh the need for a writer, at least in the snowboard space, I just kind of gravitated in that direction. But part of me, I did recognize, part of me was like, if I just remain a writer, I think there might be a shelf life to this in a weird way. So why don't I start shooting photos too, to become a little bit more versatile and valuable to brands, right?
Well, you bring up the snowboarder thing too, and I mentioned it earlier, is like I started Snowboarder magazine, and what was really interesting is that you closed it. And so again, the print magazine, you were at the end of it, and then it was that transition into the digital social world that we know. So you really broke ground on bringing social and snowboarding together. Yeah. And talk to me about that transition.
Well, I got to give a ton of credit to Mike Yoshida. Mike Yoshida was our associate photo editor. So he and Huggy were handling all the photos for Snowboarder magazine. And I remember him kind of taking charge of our Instagram account. Yep. And Yosh, just by like scrolling and kind of messing around and doing test posts, figured out how this algorithm worked. And I don't think it works the same way now, but at the time he was like, "Hey, if we follow this like weird little formula, I think we can get like 50,000 Instagram followers in 4 months." Wow. And so he had the keys to the Porsche, and it just kind of took off. And then, Bridges had the wherewithal at the time and so did Nick Hamilton at Transworld Snowboarding and Jen Shirowski and the whole squad. The entire snowboard industry, the entire snowboard media landscape started to kind of go more toward like how a mainstream sport is covered. So instead of like shooting all your photos and then sitting on them for a week and putting them in a print issue, it was get them on the website as fast as possible. Bingo. X Games is done. Just one quick photo for the website, get a ton of hits, and then you can do the recap story 4 days later. We did the same thing at Super Park and at the launch and all that stuff. It was, at the time, it was really fun. It was a ton of work, but we didn't really kind of understand what kind of box we had opened that now could not be closed.
Amazing.
And it just created more work. And I mean, I'm sure Jen can talk to it too. Like, you weren't getting a pay raise for staying up till 2:00 in the morning 5 nights a week during Super Park, but you were keeping the lights on because you were getting a ton of clicks, right? And so it's funny because at the time I didn't realize what was happening, but now looking back on it, I'm kind of like, oh shit, that was the start of all of this. That was it.
So I thought it would be fun is, like, selfishly, I just would love for you to kind of explain some of these photos. I went through your website and found this picture, and we can cut to it here, but can you share more about the behind the scenes? The
Yeah,
making
so
of?
so this photo of Jed, ironically enough, I actually mislabeled it on my website as Helsinki, Finland, because I've been to Finland with Jed a couple times. It was Quebec, Canada. And this is right after Jed got on Ride. And I forget what building that was, but it was there was like a super high bust factor. It was some sort of museum or something along those lines. And Jed found this really cool feature. What's interesting about Jed is sometimes I feel like he just wants to get a good photo. And he kind of knew that this would make a good photo, maybe a better photo than a video shot.
Right.
And so I hastily set my stuff up super quick because we didn't want to get busted. And I had 3 lights with me, but I only had time to set up one. You can see it comes from just from the side of the takeoff. And maybe Jed had 4 or 5 hits on it. And I remember the first go, I was like, well, let's see what this light looks like. Sometimes you don't know until you pop the flash, and it just lined up perfectly. Like I just got the placement right, and I got the power setting correct, and I had the shutter speed and the aperture all dialed, and I was like, yo, it's go time. I think the first one he did was just like an ollie over it, and then as soon as I gave him the thumbs up and I was like, we're good, he kind of got into this press. And Jed is one of the most aesthetic riders I've ever shot, and it's all in the arms right here is what does it for me.
Right.
It's the way he's pressing his board, and the clothes he's wearing, of course, are really cool. That plays into a shot. But Jed does something with his arms that sometimes I see it in basketball now. You have really, really good style, and it translates. And I kind of feel like this photo was my photo of the year that year. And it literally happened in like a 25-minute span. I'm pretty sure we got kicked out after this by a security guard.
Right.
But I'm, driving home that night back to the Airbnb, I remember being like, I can't wait to get this on my computer.
That's
like,
addictive right
I'm
there.
like, I know I got a good one. One of those works really well.
Banger.
So yeah, I really love that photo. And I feel honored that I got to shoot with Jed Anderson as much as I did, because
Great.
that kid is a one in a million talent. Yeah, he's incredible.
So I'll describe this one a little bit better for our friends that are driving their car now, and they
Yeah.
can't look at our YouTube channel. And I encourage everybody to go to our YouTube channel and check it out at CoPro on YouTube. But again, what I'm looking at, it looks like it's a night shot. We've got some streaks. There's a strobe on the side. Looks like the rider is in the middle of looks like maybe a 540, and it's almost the city in the background. That's the visuals, but tell me more. What's
Dude,
going on
you
here?
know your shit. That's a Switchback 5. That was Bodie Merrill, and his dad still works at Park City Snowcats. He's a guide up there, Backcountry Bob. Legendary dude. And I want to say it was Bodie's birthday or Bob's birthday. Bodie was filming a movie that was shot. Half of the movie was shot during the day, half was shot at night. I think it was called Contrast. Great name, right?
Super.
And this was during his, night riding section. So Bodie talked to his dad and was like, hey, can we go catboarding up there at night? So we get up to Park City Snowcats. It's like 6 p.m., 5 p.m. maybe. And we take a couple warm-up laps. And right as it gets dark, we go to this spot. And Bodie had a headlamp on each leg,
All right.
a headlamp on his head, and then we parked the Snowcat just outside the frame, if
Yep.
you're looking at the photo, to the left to shine the lights on the takeoff so I could get a focal point. And again, there was nowhere for me to put my flash except for right next to the takeoff. So Bodie went once. It did not work for me at all. And I was like, okay, I'm going to do a 25 or 30 second long exposure. And I'm going to put my camera on a tripod.
Okay.
I press the remote to open the shutter.
Yep.
And then I counted down from 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And I yelled Bodie drop because I had timed how long it took him to get. It was about 15 to 20 seconds to get from where he was dropping to takeoff. And on the third try, oddly enough, this is the one he stomped because you can see him pin it
Out of frame.
down here all the way back to the cat.
Oh, I see.
You see him go all the way to the other cat
Right.
that was waiting for us at the bottom of the frame. And I hit it, even though it was pretty dark. I just saw the trick in my head more than I watched it in real life because I know how Bodhi does them. And I run over to my camera, and you know how sometimes it takes like a minute to render a long exposure, and I was just waiting and waiting, and Bodhi's radioing up. He's like, "Did we get it? Did we get it?" And I just saw it on the LCD screen, and I'm like, "Dude, I think we fucking got it." And he was like, "Cool, because I'm never fucking doing that again."
Wow.
And it just really, that one is one of my favorites of all time. Bodhi requested the high res of that to print out, and he brought it up to Park City Snowcats, and it's hanging up in the lodge.
Huge.
Yeah.
So there's no landing light, so for Bodhi to have safety. I also see that there's the streaks from the lamps that are on his body, and this is what the red is.
And this little gap in the red streak is he's coming around this way, and that's where his
he's on the other
headlamp
side.
goes away,
I get
and
it.
then it comes back right there.
Yep.
And then he lands, and you can see too. These are the ones on his legs,
Yep.
the green and the yellow. And actually, it was like one of the biggest honors of my career in Bodhi's bomb hole. They asked him what his favorite photo has ever been taken of him was, and I'm pretty sure he said this one.
We'll say he did.
Well,
I'm going to say it is.
I'm
It's
pretty sure
amazing.
he did because I texted him after, and he was like, "Oh yeah, can I get the high res of that?"
Sweet.
And that's what kind of precipitated.
So what we've got for our friends in the car today is this insane snowdrift shot in black and white, and just the contrast is amazing. And then the plume by the rider, it almost mirrors what nature has put down in this cornice, and that's their visual. Go to the YouTube website, CoPro, and check it out live. Tell me more.
Yeah, so this is a photo of Jake Blauvelt in Lake Tahoe, California. We were snowmobiling in the Ebbets Pass area, and we had, ridden some stuff right off the pass, and Kyle Schwartz, who was the filmer, was like, "Hey, I have this zone." I think he called it like Mueller Land, like Nicholas Mueller
Don't tell
Land.
anybody. It's a secret.
I think that's just what he called it himself. And so we go to this zone, and Blauvelt sees this kind of wind lip sort of cornice looking thing, and I thought he was gonna come up the takeoff here in the top left of the frame, and I thought he was gonna push up a little hip and then try to land into this zone.
Yep.
But he was like, without saying much, he's like, "I think I'm just gonna slash the top of it." And I was like, okay. So I thought about shooting it kind of fisheye with him going around me, and then I snowboarded down to the bottom, and I looked up, and I just saw this like perfect
Pyramid.
contrast of light, and I was like, I'm gonna let the light do the work on this one, and kind of see what happens. So Jake told me where he was gonna go. I set my focus, got all my settings right, and it was color, but it was shot to turn black and white,
Right.
if you know what I'm saying.
Yep.
The way I shot it in color, I knew that when I clicked that tab in Lightroom, it was going to instantly change the whole look and vibe and feeling of the photo. And again, that was another one where, snowmobiling back to the car, I was like, I cannot wait to see what this thing looks like on my computer.
Yeah.
And I remember showing Jake, we were staying in these little cabins, and he was like, all right. And if you know Jake Blauvelt, that's all you're getting out of him, right? He doesn't get overly excited,
Yep.
but I knew he was stoked on it.
Yep.
And that was one of my favorite backcountry photos from that year.
Love it. It's a great story. Thank you. This has got to be one of your favorite pictures of all time. And so for our fans driving down the road, it's a picture of a new mom and her baby embracing.
That is hands down my favorite, and I think the most important photo I've ever taken in my life. That was the first time that my wife got to hold our daughter Eloise, who we call Louie. And it's crazy looking at it now because she's turning 7 in a couple weeks. She's like a full-grown little mini human. But I remember, my wife going into labor. We gave birth at University of Utah Hospital, and in my go bag, right, I threw my little Fuji XT100.
Okay.
Because I was like, I know I'm going to need this at some point. And so I didn't bust it out during the actual birth because I felt like that just wasn't the time and place, right? But as soon as our daughter was born, we had a doula, and I gave her my camera, and I was like, hey, can just start snapping away.
Yep.
just go nuts. And she did shoot a photo of the doctor holding our daughter. It's a little blurry, but I kind of like it. And then this photo was when we got to the hospital room, and they kind of take the kiddo for like a little evaluation. Then they bring the kid into your room, and that was right after they had handed Louis to Lauren. And I remember wanting to get in there because it was my daughter, but as the photographer in me kicked in, and I'm like, this is the only time I'm ever going to be able to shoot this photo. So I just took a couple minutes and shot photos of the two of them just meeting each other, I guess you could say, for the first time, and figuring out how this thing was going to work. And this is hands down my favorite photo ever. And I actually just showed my daughter this photo the other day, and she was like, that's not me.
Aww.
That doesn't look like me. And I'm like, I promise you that was you.
How old's your daughter now?
She'll be 7 on August 14th.
And congratulations.
Yeah.
And if you haven't been able to tell by the passion that you shared in that story, there's this positive energy around you, Tom.
Thanks.
It's like, I feel you're warm and safe and secure around your being. Tell me where that came from. Why is it that you have it and Jake doesn't, we'll say?
No, Jake does.
We won't throw him under the bus. I just want to talk about you and your positive energy.
He's not. I'm like a golden retriever, and Jake's like, what's an uber smart? Like Jake's like a border collie. I'm like a golden retriever. I don't know. Positive energy. First of all, I really appreciate that compliment. That, especially coming from you, it's crazy sitting next to you. By the way, it's a wild kind of mental process I'm going through because you were one of my idols growing up. I don't know where it came from. I feel really lucky in the sense that I haven't had a lot of trauma in my life. I don't think I have a ton to unpack. And so because of that, I recognize my privilege and I'm grateful for it. And I just think there are so many people going through so much more stuff that I need to be grateful for how well I've had it, I guess you could say. Yes, I'm a child of divorce, and I've had obstacles in my life, but for the most part, I'm incredibly grateful. I think every single day of my life, I think to myself how lucky and happy and grateful I am to be in the position that I'm currently in. And so maybe that just kind of shines through in some weird way, but I don't mean it to. So to hear that is like it's an incredible compliment. It really is. Yeah.
Keep it going, and I hope anybody that's watching today or listening, I'm hoping too that they can kind of find that within themselves and share and carry themselves that way, because the world needs more of this.
And I think as I continually think about the answer to your question, I've been surrounded by creative, passionate, caring, empathetic, and just generally pleasant individuals in the snowboard space. And I think 25, 30 years of that has kind of shaped me into a weird manifestation of all of that energy that has kind of taken me throughout my career. From Jed to Tanner McCarty, Hava Fernandez, Aaron Blatt. I mean, people that I really consider like family to me.
Right.
And I don't know if that exists in many other industries outside of snowboarding. And so again, for that, I'm incredibly grateful.
Hello, and we're back at CoPro. As you know, Tom, my name is Jennifer Sharowski, and I'm a creative director here at Nemo. Tom and I are old-time homies from the old days, as the old heads say. And I was listening to you talk to Trevor earlier, and you and I come from the same background. As you mentioned my name. You and I were born into our careers as little babies into the world of being staff journalists at snowboard magazines, which is a pretty niche thing to do. Yeah. There's not very many of us out there.
Yeah.
But when I look at your career, as you were listening to you talk about it, you're so kaleidoscopic, like all the things that you do. You know, you're a writer, you're an editor, you're a photographer, you're a producer, professional wrangler, you know, you're an on-air host, you're a great on-air host and
Thank you.
podcaster and dad and snowboarder, and probably more things than even that. And I just think it's interesting, you know, I think being a journalist, especially in a niche kind of passion culture like snowboarding, sets you up pretty well to be, you know, kind of multitask and be prolific in breadth of your career. I mean, like, think of all the things we were probably doing intuitively that we didn't even know we were doing. Like, you know, you have to authentically connect with your community, otherwise it's not going to work. You've got to like bring a bit of like organization to a chaotic you know, the chaos of the culture and big personalities and kind of what's going on hill. You know, you've got to like build connections and earn respect that you're going to like call on those connections later.
Yep.
You've got to notice things and be like you have to have that skill of like identifying what's important to highlight, like what in the
Yep.
story is going to get people like leaning in and make them care. And, you know, by the way, we were held to pretty, as you mentioned, like pretty rigorous schedules of creative output along the way. So it teaches you to kind of like, you got to make things happen. And I was just curious, like, do you see it that way? And I don't know, I just feel like it was a real trial by fire experience that certain types of personalities gravitate towards and thrive in. And I don't know, talk a little bit about that and like how you grew your skills and your passions, and like how you kind of followed your heart around to grow and like, you know, grow your personal brand.
Yeah, you know, as much as I want to say it was like me thinking about my future, it was less that and more me, I don't want to say getting bored with anything, but being like, okay, I've done this, I think, at the highest level.
I heard you say it, right? Writing is boring.
No. It was more me being like, oh, what's behind this door? What's behind that door? Like in terms of with the snowboard announcing stuff, that was actually 100% by accident. Mm-hmm. I was back, I want to say 2008 or 2009 at the US Open, and this is before there was like a camera pointing toward you. We were in a Go-To-11 trailer, me and Bridges, watching like a tiny little square TV and just had microphones, and we're like announcing. And someone asked me if I wanted to do it, and I was like, sure, I'll give it a try. And then I just kept getting invited back. And so I was like, okay, if I'm going to do this portion of snowboard journalism, I'm going to try to be really good at it. And so I would go back and watch Salema Masekela, Todd Harris, Todd Richards, you know, all of the greats in our space. And in a weird way, I would just try to copy them. Right? Imitation is the greatest form of flattery. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna fake it till I make it. And eventually I feel like I developed my own style, right? I wasn't, you know, funny like Jack Matrani. I wasn't an icon like Salema Masekela or Todd Richards. So where do I fit in? I'm the insider and I know all the tricks and I got the inside scoop on what the riders are talking about at the bar. And I think that became my brand in a weird way.
Yeah.
And then
you found your voice through repetition.
Yep.
And,
like Tony Romo in the NFL, right? He knows football so well that he can call the play before it happens. I like to think that was kind of my space and where that was. With photography, you know, you had amazing street photographers, you had amazing backcountry photographers, and I was like, I don't want to be amazing at street. I don't want to be amazing at backcountry. I want to be proficient at all of it. So, you know, competitive snowboarding, half pipe and slopestyle and big air, and then, you know, learning how to snowmobile and getting into the backcountry, going on street trips. I look at a rider like Bodie Merrill, right? And Bodie won X Games gold backcountry and X Games gold street. And I was like, that's where I want to be in my journalism career. I kind of want to be this do-it-all weapon that can, I feel like I'm bragging too much. I wanted to be proficient in every single thing that I did. Maybe not one of the greats, maybe not Dean Blotto Gray or Cole Barish or Andy Wright, but right up there. in the conversation on that second tier. And I think I accomplished that.
It's funny you're saying like I didn't it wasn't about planning, but you just the way you just talked, like it was very shrewd, and you've been like, you know, clear about like I don't, you know, where's the white space, like where do I want to come in and own something. So I think that's pretty cool the way it was in a way planned or just executed really intelligently. And I think it's pretty impressive. Like, talk about being, you know, you're sort of a generalist. Is that almost challenging in a way to brand yourself? Because it's kind of like specialists are, you can be specific, you know, you're like, I'm the best photographer in the world. And so, but at the same time, you're limiting yourself.
Right.
So there's like benefits and drawbacks to being a generalist and a specialist.
Yep. 100%. And with it comes a savage imposter syndrome that is constantly following me around, right? Because I never specialized in one certain thing. So a lot of times when I'm jumping into all these different areas, I feel like I'm a bit of a poser, even though nobody else in the room thinks that. Nobody. But me personally internalizing it, I'm like, I don't belong here, right?
Yeah.
Like, I don't belong this far out in the backcountry. They probably think I'm a kook. There's all that mental stuff that goes on that no one really knows that I'm dealing with at the time. And I know it's all bullshit.
Of course.
But with that does come a little bit of like imposter syndrome for sure. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think anyone can relate to that. And, you know, when you're looking at how you tell stories now and how you approach that, like speaking of people who are coming up, young storytellers, what are some tricks or tips that you use as you're going in to kind of like get over that and be like, well, like, is it something that plagues you? Or
I feel like the mediums of storytelling now are so much more like in abundance than there was when we were kind of, I hate to say in our prime at the mags, but in our prime at the mags, that I don't think it matters as much anymore.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, you go to any NBA sideline or NFL sideline, and the kid with the iPhone is just as important as the kid with the $10,000 video camera, right? Because they're shooting for different mediums. And so that's really helped me kind of calm my fears and say like, okay, cool. I may not feel like I belong here, but I belong here. I've earned this, right? And I know I'm competent, and I know I'm capable, and I know I'm going to deliver and do what I was hired to do. And so that's really helped me quite a bit.
That's such an interesting insight and way to look at it too, is like the decentralization of like everyone with a phone and a point of view is a storyteller now.
Totally.
And that like, we love that, like, you know, more raw content is fine. And we're not after like the professional glossy, we're after something that's really authentic. And so looking at it that way, you don't have to put as much pressure on yourself in a way.
Right. And
you know the story is going to come from your heart.
Exactly. And if you look at it, you know, the key to making magazines back in the day was eyeballs, right? You want as many people as humanly possible to hold the magazine in their hands and flip through it. So what would you say at Transworld was the most you ever sold of one magazine? Sold and had subscribers? 100,000? Maybe 120? Think about a reel.
Oh, yeah.
Every single day they're racking up hundreds and hundreds of thousands of views. So it kind of flattened everything, right? And made it okay to have your little niche storytelling, your mainstream storytelling, your TikTok, your Instagram. It compartmentalized everything. And I know myself well enough, even though I'm that generalist and I want to go do everything, I'm not going to be TikTok guy. I'm 43 years old. There still
could be time.
There could be time. I could become an influencer, but that's not anything that I feel passionate about. And so,
and go where the passion is, for sure.
Exactly. Yeah. And my goal in snowboarding was just longevity, right? I was never going to be, you know, I got fired from Snowboarder magazine, and I wasn't sitting there being like, well, fuck the snowboard industry and it's changed and fuck this and fuck, like I wasn't.
Yeah, the you owe me mentality.
I didn't feel like I was owed anything. I felt gratitude for being able to do it for 13 or 14 years. And then I feel like because of my connections in the industry, one of the first phone calls I got was from Liam Griffin and Travis. and they were just getting NST off the ground. And so I'm sitting there being like, oh shit, what am I going to do? I think they were sitting there being like, hey, let's call T-Bird.
Yeah.
Let's see what he's up to.
Yeah.
And so I literally went from, getting laid off, which was a super bummer, to looking at the pitch deck for a natural selection tour
Getting
like
scooped right
2
up.
weeks later. And I was like, sure, let's go down this road. And then they realized that they kind of needed someone on staff who knew the riders really well and could
Yeah.
call them and like pitch them on the idea and get them to sign on. And I was kind of like the guy on the inside for them in a weird way. And I do think my involvement, was a large part in getting the crew of riders that we had to participate.
Which is like you were talking a bit about where the position you were going to own is what type of announcer you were going to be. And, it's like that personality of being like the authentic guy on the inside is the role you're playing
Right.
there as well, which I think is pretty cool and interesting. Talk a bit more about natural selection. Maybe talk first about, for people who don't know, maybe give a quick synopsis of what it is and how it's different.
Yeah, the Natural Selection Tour is a all-mountain freestyle backcountry snowboarding event. And their tagline is like Mother Nature is the main character. It's not just about the riders. It's not just about Travis. It's something that's meant to inspire anybody in any season to go out and just enjoy nature, right? Mm-hmm. And so anyone can sign on for that. But the big draw for me was, all of the riders and the potential for visibility for them and for them to advance their careers. And also, I feel like slopestyle and halfpipe was getting a little monotonous even for me to watch and for me to announce. And so when they came along with this idea, well, first I thought it was batshit crazy. Straight up. I was like, I don't think this can work, but you're going to pay me and I'm going to see it through. And then Travis being Travis, reckless optimism at all times, just kind of pushed forward, and we put on a test event. And once we did the test event, I remember looking at Liam Griffin. I was like, dude, we can do this.
You've got something here.
Like, we can for sure do this. And, how you do it live in the backcountry, none of that was my purview.
Yeah.
But where I fit in, I think for them, was rider liaison, as they called it, kind of an athlete manager. But then I can write social copy. I can shoot photos at the event. I can be on camera at the event.
Yeah, get in where you fit in.
I could be in the booth, whatever it may be. It's actually funny if anyone's ever been to a natural selection event. I think watching me, they're probably like, what the fuck is that guy doing? Because I got a 400 millimeter lens. I'm shooting a ton. I'm wearing the full NST kit. And as soon as the rider hits a certain point, I turn the camera off and I grab a microphone from the producer.
You got a Pacifico.
And then I got to crack the Pacifico
plug,
or whatever.
yeah.
And then I'm interviewing someone.
Yeah.
But again, that kind of jack of all trades, master of none, I
Yep.
think fit in perfectly with their organization. So, and it's been a fun ride.
Talk a little bit about, what did you learn watching, visionaries like Liam Griffin and Travis Rice? Like, it's just been so impressive to watch, like, that event unfold from how they're branding it and how they're creating it, making it grow.
Yeah.
What did you learn, and what do you think are some of the most, innovative things that event has done?
I've learned that with Travis, like, he can take a no, right? But he won't accept it. Like, you can tell him no, and he'll be like, okay. And then he'll go ask someone else until he gets a maybe, and then he just, pushes that way. And it's admirable. If I'm like, hey, can I do this? And someone's like, no way. I'm like, okay, cool. I'll go find something else to do. That's not how Travis works. And it's Liam's job to figure out how that works, right? And watching Liam work is really incredible, because that dude's brain works like a supercomputer. It works in a different way than mine works.
Yep.
Analytically breaking down, different situations and obstacles and hurdles. Like, I feel like if you looked inside Liam's brain, it would be like an Excel spreadsheet that's like constantly moving shit around, like numbers. And that to me is incredible, because I just kind of don't work that way.
They're like the perfect duo, because
100%.
it's like Travis has a vision and Liam implements the vision.
It's like brains and brawn, 100%, because Trav is going to be Trav.
Yep.
And he wouldn't be him unless he was truly himself. And Liam is someone who will help Travis execute this, like, albeit maybe crazy vision that he might have. And there's other people too. There's Nicola Deschamps, who is like another one of the brains behind the operation. This girl Tiffany that runs all the social stuff. Nick Koldenhoven, one of the editors. They really have like a very special crew there.
Talk a bit about times when things went sideways behind the scenes, because it's such a, I mean, doing a live event in the backcountry, I feel like is one of the most ambitious things that you could possibly do. And I think there was a moment, was it last year, when like the cameras dipped and you guys on screen hosts were having to kind of, you know, talk over dead air, and we were wondering at home, like, are the judges seeing the riding? And I just would be curious, like, how that machine, you know, like navigates challenge like that. Yeah,
100%. I don't know what happened, but something happened with the satellite feed. And I remember in the field, right, as like the field correspondent, Stan and I wasn't sweating because we had nothing to do. I felt bad for Mary and Bridges and Hannah Beeman and Ed Lee and Todd and
like,
Eddie
well,
Wall.
Anyway.
Because I've been in that position before where there's some course hold and the producer comes in and they're like, we need you to just noodle for 45 minutes. And we got these 6 packages that we're going to toss to, and we'll let you know when we're going to toss to them. But earlier that day, the venue was called Montana Bowl, and there was the east side, which was lookers left, and the west side, which was lookers right. And the east side was a little bit steeper. It was probably 35 to 38 degrees, and the lookers right side was probably more along that 28, less avalanche danger. Slope angle. And so Ski Patrol was like, hey, we have to drop a couple bombs on the east face. And so they made all the riders back up, all the staff back up, and they start throwing bombs. And one entire lane where a ton of riders had wanted to go, the entire gut ripped out and was just completely unrideable. And that was the first thing they bombed. And so everyone's sitting there and they're like,
what now?
What if the whole face goes? What if the same thing happens down the gut? What if the same thing happens on the west side? And you, at a certain point, Travis always says, like, you got to manifest shit. You just kind of like, you throw your hands up and you're like, if that happens, then I guess we'll figure it out. I don't know what that looks like. Luckily, it didn't happen. You could still ride some of the spines on the looker's left side, which riders did. Just when you exited the spine, you were jumping into like Barney Rubble bullshit, and you kind of had to power your way through it. But the whole west side was totally fine after a couple bombs. So there's always little stuff that happens.
Readjustment, find a new North Star.
But I think that's all backcountry travel.
Yeah.
I don't know many people who have had like perfectly easy situations in the backcountry, right? It's almost like every day you come out from the zone, you hit the trailhead, and you're like, well, that one thing was kind of fucking crazy. Like, there's always little stuff that's constantly going wrong, and you just have to like do these little micro adjustments to make it happen. It just makes it harder when you have 24 riders and 300 people out there drinking 10-barrel beers at 9 a.m. waiting for this to go down. And again, I feel like that's where like a Liam Griffin comes in, where he's just like, just keep calm, right? We'll figure this out. Nobody panic. And that's why he's like so important to that organization.
I'm always so amazed at the scale and scope. And I think what I'm hearing is like, it just takes, to do great groundbreaking things, like really takes confidence. Like, and Travis has such confidence. You're talking about kind of not taking a no. So it's cool to watch. It's such a phenomenon.
I wish I had like half the confidence that Travis has. You know what I mean? But I also don't have half the skill that Travis has. I kind of think that's one and the same. Your own skills. I got my own skills. But it's, like if you sat down with Travis as a brand and said, tell us why we should hire you, he would tell you in 25 seconds. Instantly, brands tell me all the time, like, tell us why we hire you. And I'm just kind of like, I like shrink into my own body. And I'm like, you don't have to. Like, it's your choice. So his confidence is admirable.
It's amazing. Well, I could talk to you all day about this stuff. We should probably wind it up. I would love to know, A, what are you working on now? And B, like, what's next? Like, is there anything any feathers you want to put in your cap career-wise, or anything that you're kind of identifying that you're like, that'd be cool?
Yeah. Currently, I'm doing a lot of random stuff. I'm currently not on contract with Natural Selection Tour. Maybe this fall I'll jump back on with them. We'll see kind of where those conversations go. But I'm helping out at Snowboard Magazine, helping them get their print issues out the door this year, working with Jeff Baker and Mike Basher and Mark Clavin, which has been fun. I feel like the magazine hangover kind of wore off, right?
Yeah,
For a little bit. I wouldn't say I was salty, but I was like, I'm not doing that.
I'm good on that.
Not doing that
Yeah.
again.
Yeah.
But I recently parted ways with Ride Snowboards. I was their staff photographer for 8 years or 9 years. And I just kind of had this, I Joe Biden'd it, right?
Yep.
I was like, listen.
bow out gracefully.
I was like, listen, I'm
Yep.
going on 43. I think you need someone younger. I love the riders. That's like my family, the ride team.
Yeah.
And I called each one of them kind of individually and said, hey, this is happening. I'm going to step away. I'll still shoot when I can for you guys. But I just kind of want to be home more. Like
Yeah.
my daughter is going snowboarding a lot, and I want to walk her to school, and I want to be part of like that community we're building through the Portland public school system, right? She has so many cool friends that have awesome parents, and I just want to be around more. So I'm no longer with Ride, so I jumped on with Snowboard Mag, and then the fine folks at Nemo have me, my man Nick over there, doing a bunch of copy editing for some various Nemo clients, which is really fun.
Yeah.
It sounds nerdy, but I know you relate. I love copy editing.
yeah.
I love taking like
Drink
a messy,
coffee, let it wash over you.
a messy document over a cup of coffee, and it's like painting a wall.
Controlling a world of chaos.
100%. Track
Yeah.
those changes, right? Checking character counts. So that's been really fun. And then last season was my second year shooting with the Portland Trailblazers. I feel like that next itch, that next little like thing I need to scratch is more mainstream photography, mainstream
Yes.
sports photography. So this all kind of started, I'll try to keep it short, but it started with a podcast with Atiba Jefferson and how he got into shooting the NBA. Atiba's my favorite photographer in any sport, I think, of all time. And, he talked about how he started working with Andrew Bernstein, who's legendary NBA Lakers photographer. And so I got this kind of wild, stupid idea to just DM the Portland Trailblazers staff photographer. His name's Bruce Ely. Follow him on Instagram because he's the GOAT. He's incredible. And so I DM'd Bruce, and Bruce hit me back, and he's like, hey, I looked at your website. You're pretty good. And he kind of brought me into the fold. And I don't want to like make it seem like it's fancier than it is. I am starting like at the bottom.
Yeah.
Like not at the bottom, but I am a worker bee, right? I go into the stadium, I have my shot list, I get it uploaded to the server, and I leave. And it's great. It's super fun. I like the energy. I like the excitement, the whole atmosphere, and everybody that works at the Trailblazers organization is awesome. They're incredible to work with.
That's an amazing story for young creatives trying to come up in the industry, that you unlocked shooting the Portland professional basketball by DMing the staff photographer. And,
Yeah.
don't be afraid to do those things and
Totally.
reach out. And he probably looked at you and thought, this guy is owning a whole other, category, and obviously gets sport and gets,
Right.
performance, but may come in with a different eye.
Totally. And it's funny, he's a diehard skier. Like, he loves skiing.
Oh, really?
So
Oh.
he's familiar with that, skiing and snowboarding and action sports photography. But it is funny because the photo team at the Blazers, for the most part, are like 23, 24-year-old kids. They're like me when I first started at Snowboarder Magazine, fresh out of college or still in college, and they're making their inroad into the NBA. Like, one day they're going to work for Getty or AP or a team or the NBA itself. And I can't wait to see where like that squad goes. As for me, I don't know where it's going to lead. It could lead nowhere. But for now, it's like, it's scratching the itch, right? It's giving me that that new challenge of like, okay, I got to figure out something new, and I have to get on the level of everybody else that I'm shooting with. And I think I'm getting there, but it's been really fun. And then that thankfully has led to some work in the MLS, I guess, in Northwest Soccer League, or sorry, National Women's Soccer League. And I've been doing a little bit of photo work this summer for the Timbers and the Thorns.
Yeah.
So that's been really fun too.
It's growing quickly.
Yeah.
It's so cool.
It's been awesome.
Well, Tom, thank you so much for giving us your time. I never get to see you around Portland. I feel like I have a parasocial relationship with you.
I know, me too.
I see you on my screen. But I can't wait till the next project we get to collaborate on. It was good to see you.
I can't wait. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you.